The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was fitting, because Tuesdays had always been the day Meridia Voss's life chose to fall apart. The eviction notice, the day her father stopped speaking in full sentences, the afternoon her brother Jonathan had knocked on the parlor wall with a scheme so absurd it should have been illegal. This particular Tuesday brought a carriage she hadn't requested, a dress she couldn't afford, and instructions written in handwriting so precise it looked mechanical. Be at Thornfield Assembly Rooms by 7 o'clock. Wear the gray silk. Speak to no one until you are spoken to. Do not, under any circumstances, refuse what is offered. The note was unsigned, but Meridia knew Jonathan's fingerprints were all over it, figuratively, if not literally. Her younger brother had been entangled with a man named Declan Farshaw for the better part of 2 years, chasing opportunities that never quite materialized and borrowing against futures that didn't exist. Meridia had learned to dread the sound of Jonathan's voice when it carried that particular pitch of excitement, the one that meant he'd found another golden door that would inevitably open onto a brick wall. She should have refused. She should have folded the letter into the fire, hung the gray silk back in its borrowed garment bag, and spent her evening the way she spent every evening, tallying her mother's mending accounts and pretending the numbers weren't shrinking. Instead, she went. The assembly rooms were nothing like she'd imagined. A private auction house converted for a single evening into a glittering salon, chandeliers blazing, the air thick with beeswax and expensive perfume, and people dressed in silks that cost more than her family earned in a year. Declan Farshaw met her at the entrance, his red hair slicked back, pressing a glass of champagne into her hand. "You look perfect," he said, steering her through the crowd with a hand at her elbow. "Exactly right. Remember, don't speak unless spoken to. Just stand near the far window and look interesting." "Look interesting," Meridia repeated flatly. "That's your instruction." "Intelligent, then. Thoughtful. Whatever word you prefer. Just don't leave before the auction ends." "What auction?" But Declan was already gone, swallowed by the crowd like a fox disappearing into tall grass. Meridia stood alone with champagne she didn't want in a room full of strangers who didn't see her, and wondered, not for the first time, how she kept ending up in situations where the only sensible option had already been removed. She drifted toward the window Declan had indicated. The auction, she gathered from overheard conversation, involved paintings, estate pieces from some recently deceased lord being sold to settle debts. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even the wealthy left behind wreckage for others to sort through. She was studying a landscape hung near the window, a moody coastal scene with cliffs and storm clouds, when a voice behind her said, "That one's a forgery." She turned. The man standing 2 paces away was tall, dark-haired, with a face that looked carved from something expensive and unyielding. Marble, perhaps, or resentment. He was perhaps 32 or 33, dressed with the kind of severe elegance that suggested wealth so old it had stopped trying to impress. His eyes were gray, the exact color of the winter sea in the painting behind her, and they were fixed on her with an attention that felt like being pinned to a board. "I beg your pardon," she said. "The painting. It's attributed to Gainsborough, but the brushwork on the cliffs is wrong. Too heavy. Gainsborough painted light, not weight." He tilted his head, studying her with the same critical precision he'd applied to the canvas. "You've been standing here for 11 minutes. Are you waiting for someone? Or are you the evening's entertainment?" The rudeness of it stole her breath. "I'm a guest." "Guests circulate. You've been rooted to this window like furniture." His gaze dropped to the champagne in her hand, untouched and going flat. "Expensive furniture that doesn't drink? Perhaps I'm simply admiring the art. Perhaps. Or perhaps you've been placed here deliberately, like a painting yourself, positioned for someone specific to notice." His eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" The directness should have frightened her. Instead, it sparked something, a defiance that had been smoldering under weeks of humiliation and helplessness. No one sent me. I came of my own volition. In a dress that doesn't belong to you, to an event you clearly weren't expecting, on instructions you didn't fully understand. He said it without cruelty, but with the clinical accuracy of someone who'd already assembled the puzzle. I know Declan Fairshaw's methods. You're one of his arrangements. Meridia set the champagne glass on the windowsill with careful precision. If you know so much, then you know this conversation is over. Good evening. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. If you walk out that door, Fairshaw will lose the commission he's counting on, and whatever debt your family owes him will come due immediately. He's not generous with extensions. She didn't turn around. How do you know about my family's debts? Because I'm the one who purchased them. The world tilted. Meridia gripped the windowsill, her knuckles white against the wood. Slowly, she turned back to face him. You bought my family's debts. 3 weeks ago, from a merchant named Aldous, who was preparing to seize your mother's house. He said it the way someone might discuss the weather, factual, detached, and mildly inconvenient. You're welcome, incidentally. You expect gratitude for holding my family's survival over my head. I expect nothing. I'm simply clarifying the landscape. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, sandalwood and ink, old paper, and something sharper beneath it. My name is Caius Ashford. I'm the Duke of Heronwick, and I need you to do something for me. The title landed like a slap. A duke. She was standing in a window alcove arguing with a duke who owned her family's debts and spoke to her like she was a chess piece. He hadn't decided where to place yet. Whatever it is, she said, the answer is no. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the flicker of a card player who'd just been dealt an unexpected hand. And then, remarkably, he smiled. It was a cold smile, precise and controlled, but it reached his eyes for just a fraction of a second. Good, he said. That's exactly what I need you to keep saying. Before she could ask what that meant, the auction concluded with a crack of the gavel, and the crowd began to shift and migrate. A woman in emerald silk appeared at Caius's elbow, her dark eyes sweeping over Meridia with open curiosity. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton is asking after you. And who is this? This, Caius said, his hand moving to the small of Meridia's back with a casualness that made her spine stiffen. Is Miss Meridia Voss, an old acquaintance of my late mother's family. The lie was so smooth it barely rippled the air. The woman's eyebrows rose. I wasn't aware you had any connections to the Ashford line, Miss Voss. Distant ones, Meridia heard herself say, her mother's years of deportment training surfacing like muscle memory. Through the Chelmsford branch, we've been corresponding. The woman studied her for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that catalogued information for later use. How delightful. I'm Mrs. Calloway. Everyone knows me, which means I'll know everything about you by morning. Consider yourself warned. She swept away, and Meridia exhaled sharply. You lied, she said to Caius. I improvised. You assisted admirably. His hand was still on her back, warm and proprietary. Now, Miss Voss, shall I explain why I need you to refuse me? Or would you prefer to continue pretending you have a choice? He guided her through a side corridor, away from the main crowd, into a small reading room lined with leather-bound volumes that nobody in this building had ever read. Gas lamps cast warm circles on the Persian carpet. The door remained open, propriety maintained even in conspiracy. Caius leaned against the mantelpiece, arms folded, watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. Meridia remained standing near the door, acutely aware of the escape route behind her. Talk, she said, before I decide you're mad and leave regardless of consequences. My uncle, Lord Alistair Ashford, is the executor of my father's estate. Caius's voice was measured, each word placed like a brick. When my father died 8 months ago, the title passed to me, but the fortune, the estates, the investments, all of it remains in trust until I meet a single condition. Marriage. Specifically, marriage approved by my uncle. He has final authority over the trust until I wed someone he deems suitable. It was my father's last act of control, a clause added to the will 6 weeks before he died. And your uncle won't approve anyone you actually want to marry. My uncle won't approve anyone, period. That's the design. Caius's jaw tightened. He's been managing the Ashford fortune for 8 months, drawing a generous salary, making investments in his own name with Ashford Capital. Every month I remain unmarried. He profits. Every woman I've shown interest in, he's found reasons to reject. Insufficient breeding, questionable family, unsuitable temperament. Meridia understood immediately. He doesn't want you to marry at all. He wants to keep control of the money. Precisely. But he can't refuse forever without appearing unreasonable. So he's adopted a different strategy. Caius paused. He's selected his own candidate, a woman named Lady Portia Graves. Wealthy, titled, connected to 3 of the most powerful families in England. On paper, she's unimpeachable. If my uncle presents her and I refuse, it proves I'm not acting in good faith, and he can petition the courts to extend the trust indefinitely. So marry her. Lady Portia is my uncle's goddaughter. She's been raised in his household since she was 12. If I marry her, my uncle doesn't lose control of the fortune. He simply exercises it through her. Caius's voice dropped. She's not a villain. She's a pawn who's been trained her entire life for this specific purpose. But marrying her would mean handing my family's legacy to the man who's been systematically dismantling it. You need a candidate so unsuitable that your uncle is forced to reject her publicly, she said slowly. Someone who makes Lady Portia look like the reasonable choice by comparison, except your uncle overreacts, reveals his true motives, and loses credibility. Caius's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Interest. Maybe respect. Close, but not quite. He pushed off the mantelpiece and moved toward her. I don't need someone unsuitable. I need someone my uncle tries to destroy and fails. Someone who survives every test he throws at her, every investigation, every social ambush, and still stands. Because when she does, when she proves herself unbreakable, my uncle has no grounds left to refuse. He either approves the match or loses his hold on the fortune, or he rejects her and reveals himself as acting in bad faith. And if she breaks, then I lose everything. He stopped 2 paces from her, which is why I need someone who won't. The silence between them felt pressurized, like the air before a storm. You don't know me, Meridia said. You have no idea whether I'll break or not. I know you've held your family together for 3 years on mending income and sheer stubbornness. I know you educated yourself from lending libraries when the money for tutors ran out. I know you turned down 2 offers of marriage because both men would have required your mother to leave her home. He listed these facts without emotion, like entries in a ledger. And I know you stood in that window for 11 minutes in a borrowed dress at an event you didn't understand and didn't flinch when a stranger told you he owned your family's debts. You investigated me thoroughly. She should have been furious. She was furious. But underneath the anger was something else, the dizzying realization that someone had looked at her life, really looked at it, and seen strength instead of failure. What happens to my family's debts if I refuse? Nothing. I'm not threatening you, Miss Voss. The Aldous debt is settled. Your mother's house is secure regardless of your answer. She searched his face for the lie and couldn't find one. Then why mention them at all? Because you needed to know the landscape before you made your decision. I don't deal in hidden leverage. It's inefficient. Meridia almost laughed. You're a strange man, Your Grace. I'm a desperate one. There's a difference, though I'll admit the line is thin. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to come to Heronwick Hall and play the role of my intended for the duration of the season. My uncle will try to make you leave. He'll investigate your background, weaponize your poverty, and deploy Lady Portia as a constant reminder of what a suitable choice looks like. He will try, systematically and thoroughly, to make you say no. And you want me to refuse to say no. I want you to be so immovable that he runs out of ways to shake you. She turned away, buying time. This was insane. This was the kind of scheme Jonathan would leap at, and she would normally dismantle with logic and a refusal to participate. But Jonathan's schemes had never come with settled debts and honest warnings. What's in it for me? She asked. During the arrangement, you'll live at Heronwick Hall as my guest. Full wardrobe, staff, access to the libraries and grounds. He paused. When it ends, whether we succeed or fail, I'll provide a settlement. Enough to establish your mother comfortably and fund whatever future you choose for yourself. A shop, a school, a position, whatever you want. That's generous for a performance. It's not a performance, it's a siege, and I'm hiring the best fortification I can find. One question, she said. Ask. Why does it have to be me? You could find any number of women willing to play this role. Women with more social experience, more connections, more polish. Because my uncle would see through them. He spent 8 months dismantling women of polish and connection. What he's not prepared for is someone genuine. Someone who isn't pretending to be brave because she actually is. Caius met her eyes. He expects an actress. I'm giving him a siege engine. Meridia held his gaze for a long, measuring moment. If I do this, we do it my way. No surprises, no hidden plans. You tell me everything your uncle might use against me before he uses it. Agreed. And when this ends, however it ends, my family is left better than I found them. That's not negotiable. Already guaranteed. Then I suppose, Meridia said, with the distinct feeling of stepping off a cliff, you have yourself a siege engine, Your Grace. They were negotiating the finer points, how the introduction would be framed when she'd arrive at Heronwick Hall, what story they'd construct for public consumption, when the door to the reading room flew open and a young woman tumbled in, as if propelled by the sheer force of her own enthusiasm. She was perhaps 20, with the same dark hair as Caius, but none of his severity. Bright-eyed, flushed, wearing a gown of buttercup yellow that should have clashed with her complexion, but somehow didn't. You found her, the young woman said, pointing at Meridia with unabashed delight. You actually found her. Declan said you would, but I didn't believe him because your plans are usually terrible, Caius. No offense. Considerable offense taken, Caius said dryly. Meridia, this is my sister, Livia. She has no concept of doors or privacy or appropriate volume. I have a perfect concept of all three. I simply choose to ignore them. Livia crossed the room in 3 strides and seized Meridia's hands. Her grip was warm, her smile enormous. You're real. You're actually real. Tell me you're not awful. Meridia started. She's not awful, Caius interrupted. She's agreed to the arrangement. We were discussing logistics before you burst in like a cannon. Logistics? Livia rolled her eyes. This is what I live with, Meridia. My brother reduces everything to logistics. Love, grief, breakfast, all of it managed like estate accounts. This isn't about love, Caius said, an edge entering his voice. Not yet, Livia said brightly, and something flickered across Caius's face too quickly to identify. She turned back to Meridia, squeezing her hands. Listen, I know my brother has explained this as a strategic operation, and I know he's made it sound as appealing as a military campaign, because that's how he processes everything since Father died. But here's what he won't tell you. Livia, Caius warned. Our uncle is a monster. Livia's voice dropped. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. He moved into Heronwick Hall 3 days after Father's funeral. Dismissed staff Father had employed for decades. Sold Mother's horse, the one Father kept for 15 years because he couldn't bear to part with it. He did it all legally, and he smiled the entire time. The room felt colder. He needs to be stopped, Livia continued, and you can help. Your brother mentioned that I'll be tested, Meridia said carefully. Investigated, pressured to leave. Uncle Alastair won't just pressure you. He'll be charming about it. He'll compliment your courage while undermining your confidence. He's been doing it to me for 8 months. Livia's eyes were fierce. Which is why you need to know exactly what you're walking into, not the version Caius sanitized for strategic purposes. I didn't sanitize. You didn't mention that Uncle Alastair has already hired an investigator to look into anyone you might bring home. You didn't mention that Lady Portia will be living at Heronwick Hall during this season because Uncle Alastair installed her there last month. You didn't mention that the servants report to him, not to you, because he controls the household budget. Meridia looked at Caius, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was going to mention those details, he said stiffly. When? After she'd already arrived and couldn't leave? Livia shook her head. You treat people like pieces on a board instead of telling them the truth and trusting them to be brave. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. She's right, Meridia said quietly. Caius looked at her. If I'm walking into a siege, I need the full map. Not the version you think I can handle, the real one. His resistance gave way to acceptance, then to something that might have been relief. The full map, he said slowly. Very well. My uncle controls the household staff, the finances, and Lady Portia's movements. He has a solicitor named Gresham who handles his less savory inquiries. Your background will be investigated within days of your arrival. Every debt, every connection, every decision your family has ever made. Good, Meridia said. Let him look. I have nothing to hide. Everyone has something to hide. Then he'll be disappointed by mine. Our greatest scandal is that my father once argued with a butcher over the price of lamb and was asked not to return. She paused. It was a fair point about the lamb, for what it's worth. Livia made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob of relief. Oh, I like you. I like you enormously. Please say you'll stay. Please say you won't let Uncle Alastair drive you away. Meridia looked between them, the sister who burned with righteous fury, and the brother who'd armored himself so thoroughly against the world that he'd forgotten how to ask for help without making it sound like a transaction. I have conditions, she said. More conditions? 3. First, Livia is my ally, not yours. She tells me everything directly. Done, Livia said instantly. Second, my mother receives a letter explaining I've accepted a position as Lady Livia's companion. No mention of courtship or schemes. Reasonable, Caius said. Third, Meridia held his gaze. If Lady Portia is ever in genuine danger from your uncle, we help her. She didn't choose this any more than I did. The silence stretched. Livia's eyes widened. Caius studied Meridia with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between surprise and recalculation, as if she'd just moved a piece he hadn't accounted for. You want to protect the woman who's been positioned as your rival, he said. I want to be the kind of person who protects people who can't protect themselves. If that's inconvenient for your strategy, then perhaps you need a different siege engine. Another long pause. Then Caius extended his hand. All 3 conditions. You have my word. Meridia took his hand. His grip was firm, his palm warm. They held for a moment longer than necessary, and something passed between them. Recognition. Two people who understood desperation and had decided to face it standing. Wonderful, Livia breathed, practically vibrating with excitement. This is going to be magnificent. Uncle Alistair won't know what hit him. He'll know exactly what hit him, Caius said, releasing Meridia's hand. That's rather the point. When do I arrive? Meridia asked. Friday. Livia will send a carriage to your mother's address. Pack lightly. Everything you need will be provided. Everything I need, Meridia repeated, tasting the impossibility of those words. Dresses, shoes, books, Livia listed. And we'll need to visit Madame Laurent for your wardrobe. She'll make you look like you were born wearing silk. I wasn't born wearing silk. That's exactly the point. Livia linked her arm through Meridia's, as if they'd known each other for years, rather than minutes. Uncle Alistair expects someone who's trying to be something she's not. We're going to give him someone who's unapologetically herself. That's what will terrify him. Friday, then, Caius said, straightening his cuffs. Don't be late, Miss Voss. I'm never late, Your Grace. I simply arrive when the moment requires me. Livia laughed, delighted. Caius didn't laugh, but something shifted at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of an expression he seemed determined not to let fully form. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to prepare for a war she hadn't chosen, in a world she didn't belong to, against an enemy she'd never met. She should have been terrified. Instead, walking through the cold night air, Meridia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. It frightened her more than the terror would have. Friday arrived with rain, the kind of fine, relentless drizzle that turned the world gray and made everything feel like a held breath. Meridia stood in the narrow hallway of her mother's house with a single trunk at her feet, wearing her best dress, which was also her only good dress, a dark blue wool that her mother had taken in twice and let out once over the past 3 years. Her mother, Constance, stood in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a cloth she'd already dried them on 4 times. You'll write every week, not when you find the time. Every week. Every week, I promise. Constance crossed the hallway and pressed her palm flat against Meridia's cheek, a gesture she'd been making since Meridia was small. Her hand was warm and rough, the skin of a woman who worked for every comfort she provided. You don't have to do this, Constance said quietly. I want to. That's what worries me. Her mother's eyes searched hers. Wanting things has a cost, Meridia. Your father wanted things. Jonathan wants things. Wanting is what breaks people in this family. Maybe it's also what saves them. Constance held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, the way she did when an argument was lost, but not conceded. She tucked a small wrapped package into Meridia's hands. Lavender sachets, for your clothes. Wherever they're putting you, at least you'll smell like home. The carriage arrived precisely at 10, black and polished, and bearing the Ashford crest on its door, a falcon clutching a key. The driver, a silent man in dark livery, loaded her trunk without comment and opened the door with practiced efficiency. Meridia climbed in, waved once to her mother standing in the doorway, and watched through the rain-streaked window as her old life grew smaller and smaller behind her. The journey took 4 hours. Meridia spent the first half rehearsing what she'd say, and the second half staring at countryside that transformed from modest farmland to rolling estates with stone walls and ancient oaks. Heronwick Hall announced itself gradually. First the gatehouse, then a 1/4 mile of gravel bordered by lime trees. Then the house. Pale stone walls rose 3 stories, lined with windows that reflected the gray sky like watchful eyes. A portico with columns framed the entrance, and wings extended in both directions, swallowing the landscape. Knowing Caius was wealthy and seeing it were different languages. This house spoke in a dialect she had never learned. The entrance hall was marble-floored and high-ceilinged, portraits of generations of Ashfords, staring down with expressions that ranged from stern to openly disapproving. Meridia stood in the center of the hall, clutching her reticule, trying to look like someone who belonged. She failed. "Miss Voss." The voice came from a woman descending the stairs with the measured pace of someone who controlled every room she entered. She was perhaps 50, thin and precise, with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, and a black dress that suggested permanent mourning or permanent displeasure. "I'm Mrs. Gould, the housekeeper. His Grace informed me to expect you." "Thank you, Mrs. Gould. It's a pleasure." Mrs. Gould's expression suggested the pleasure was not mutual. "Your rooms are prepared in the East Wing. Lady Livia specifically requested the blue suite, though I should note it hasn't been used since the late Duchess occupied it." Something in her tone made the words feel like a warning. "The late Duchess's rooms." Meridia filed that information away. "I'm sure they'll be lovely," she said. "They're adequate." Mrs. Gould turned on her heel. "Follow me, please." The corridor seemed designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. Through half-open doors, she glimpsed a library that made her chest ache with longing. "The library is available to guests from 9 until 4, Mrs. Gould said, as if reading her mind. "His Grace uses it in the evenings. Lord Alistair prefers not to be disturbed during his morning correspondence, which he conducts in the West Study." "And Lady Portia?" Mrs. Gould paused, almost imperceptibly. "Lady Portia occupies the Rose Suite in the West Wing. She takes breakfast at 8 and rides every morning at 9:30. Her schedule is her own." The careful neutrality in the housekeeper's voice told Meridia everything. Mrs. Gould served whoever held the household purse strings, and right now, that was Lord Alistair. The blue suite stole her breath. A 4-poster bed, canopied in embroidered silk, a writing desk overlooking formal gardens, a wardrobe that could have housed a family of 4, and a small bookshelf stocked with volumes that looked deliberately chosen. "Lady Livia selected the books," Mrs. Gould said, and for the first time a trace of warmth entered her voice. "She has particular opinions about what constitutes proper reading material." Meridia crossed to the bookshelf. Byron, Wollstonecraft, a collection of folk tales, a guide to English wildflowers, and tucked between them, a small folded note in Livia's enthusiastic handwriting. "Welcome home. Don't let the house intimidate you. It's mostly stone and ego. The good parts are hidden. I'll show you tomorrow." Meridia smiled despite herself and pressed the note between the pages of the Wildflower Guide. "Is there anything else you require, miss?" Mrs. Gould asked. "Just one thing. Where does His Grace take his meals?" "The family dines in the small dining room at 7. Breakfast is served at 8 in the morning room." She paused. "Lord Alistair has not yet been informed of your arrival. He's expected back from London tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow. She had one day before the real test began. "Thank you, Mrs. Gould." The housekeeper departed, and Meridia stood alone in the late Duchess's rooms, surrounded by blue silk and borrowed elegance, and tried to remember who she was underneath it all. A knock came 20 minutes later. Soft, tentative. "Miss Voss?" "I'm Nettie. Lady Livia assigned me as your maid." The girl who entered was small and freckled, with auburn hair escaping its pins and an anxious expression that suggested she'd been promoted beyond her comfort. She carried a tray with tea, bread, cheese, and a small pot of honey. "I wasn't sure what you liked," Nettie said, setting the tray down with excessive care. "Cook said you'd probably want something hot after the journey, and Lady Livia said to bring honey because everyone likes honey, and I didn't want to bother you. But Mrs. Gould said I should introduce myself immediately. So here I am, and I'm talking too much, aren't I? Meridia's throat tightened. You're talking exactly the right amount, Nettie, and the honey was an excellent choice. Nettie beamed. For just a moment, in this enormous house full of strangers and strategy, something felt almost kind. Lord Allister arrived the following afternoon, not like a storm, but like a change in atmospheric pressure. Footsteps became quieter. Doors closed more carefully. Livia went still mid-sentence. He's here. The house changes when he walks in. Within the hour, a summons arrived. Lord Allister requested Miss Voss's company in the West study, at her earliest convenience. I'll come with you, Livia said. No. He wants to see me alone. Let him. The West study was flooded with afternoon light that should have felt warm, but didn't. Lord Allister stood by the window, and Meridia's first thought was that he looked nothing like a villain. Perhaps 55, silver hair combed neatly, a face that crinkled pleasantly when he smiled. He looked like kindness itself, and that was what frightened her. Please, sit down. His voice was warm, welcoming. She sat in the chair he indicated, noting it was lower than his. A small thing. Deliberate. He poured tea with practiced elegance, handing her a cup on a saucer, so thin she could see the shadow of her fingers through the porcelain. Caius has told me so little about you. I understand you're a friend of Livia's? A recent acquaintance. We met through mutual connections. I'm genuinely pleased Livia has found a friend, he continued. She has her mother's heart. Open and trusting. Beautiful until someone exploits it. The implication landed softly, a needle wrapped in cotton. I have no intention of exploiting anyone, Lord Allister. Of course not. His smile was warm enough to bake bread. Tell me about yourself, Miss Voss. I like to know who's living under the Ashford roof. She told the truth, the same truth she'd given Caius. Her father's failed business, her mother's mending work, Jonathan's restless ambitions, the careful, constrained life they'd built from the wreckage of the one they'd lost. She left nothing out because nothing she said could be worse than what his investigator would discover. Lord Allister listened with perfect attention, nodding in all the right places, his expression a masterwork of sympathetic interest. How extraordinary, he said when she finished. The resilience of your family is genuinely admirable. Most people in similar circumstances simply collapse. The fact that you've maintained your dignity, your education, your bearing, it speaks volumes about your character. Every word was a compliment. Every compliment was a measurement. Thank you, Lord Allister. I must be honest with you, Miss Voss. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to the register of shared confidence. I'm concerned about my nephew's intentions. Not regarding you specifically. Please don't misunderstand. But Caius has been behaving erratically since my brother's death, making impulsive decisions, surrounding himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear, rather than what he needs to hear. I'm not sure I qualify as someone who tells him what he wants to hear. No. Lord Allister studied her, and for the first time, something behind the warmth flickered, a flash of the real man beneath the performance. No, I don't suppose you do, which makes your presence here even more puzzling. He stood, moving to the window, presenting his back to her with the confidence of a man who didn't believe she posed any threat. Let me be direct. My nephew is grieving. He believes I'm his enemy because I'm fulfilling responsibilities his father entrusted to me. And Lady Portia, is she part of those responsibilities? The question landed harder than she intended. Lord Allister turned, his pleasant expression unchanged, but his eyes had sharpened. Lady Portia is a remarkable young woman who has been part of this family since childhood. She and Caius would make a brilliant match. Whether they will is, of course, their decision. And yours. Meridia said quietly. The silence that followed was the first honest moment between them. Lord Alistair looked at her, really looked, with an assessment that stripped away all pretense of avuncular warmth. "You're cleverer than I expected," he said. "Caius chose well in that regard, at least." "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Both." He returned to his chair, but his posture had changed, less paternal, more adversarial, though the shift was so subtle most people would have missed it. "I want to tell you something about this family, Miss Voss. Something my nephew doesn't fully understand." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that sounded, for the first time, genuine. "My brother loved recklessly. Married a woman with no connections because she made him feel alive. Catherine was extraordinary, but she died bringing Livia into the world, and my brother spent 20 years as a ghost." Lord Alistair's voice thinned. "I watched my brother die twice. Once when Catherine left him, and once when his body caught up with his heart. The estates fell into disrepair, all because a brilliant man chose love over duty." "You blame her," Meridia said. "I blame the idea that love is sufficient, that a good heart compensates for a lack of position." His eyes found hers. "Lady Portia won't inspire that kind of madness. She'll be a partner, not a drug. And I'm the drug. You're the disruption." Lord Alistair's mask slid back into place, smooth and warm and impenetrable. "A charming one, I'll admit. But disruptions end, Miss Voss. They always end. And when they do, someone has to sweep up the wreckage. That someone is invariably me." He stood. "You're welcome at Harenwick Hall for as long as my nephew wishes, but I want you to understand something." He smiled, and the warmth of it was terrifying. "I've outlasted every disruption, every infatuation, every scheme. And I will outlast you, not through cruelty, simply through patience. I appreciate your candor, Lord Alistair." He opened the study door for her. In the corridor, Livia was waiting, her face tight with worry. "What did he say?" "He told me about your parents," Meridia said slowly. "About your mother. About what losing her did to your father." Livia's face crumpled, then hardened. "He uses that story like a weapon. Like Mother's death was a cautionary tale instead of a tragedy." "Is it true? About the estates declining?" "Parts of it. Father was negligent in some areas after Mother died, yes. But Uncle Alistair wasn't maintaining things out of love. He was positioning himself, becoming indispensable, making sure that when Father finally died, no one could question his authority, because he was the only one who knew where all the pieces were." They walked together through the corridor, and Meridia felt the house pressing in around her, all its beauty and weight and history bearing down like stone. "He told me he'd outlast me," she said. "He says that to everyone." Livia's jaw set. "He hasn't met you yet. Not really. He's met the version of you that sits politely and drinks tea. He hasn't met the version that makes my brother forget how to be cold." Meridia stopped walking. "Your brother isn't cold. He's careful." Livia looked at her with an expression that was suddenly, startlingly adult. "Yes, he is, and you're the first person who's understood the difference." They stood in the hallway between the east and west wings, between the borrowed rooms and the uncle's territory, and Meridia realized that this house wasn't just a building. It was a battlefield, drawn in marble and silk, and she'd just had her first skirmish. She hadn't won, but she hadn't lost either. And for now, that was enough. The first week settled into a rhythm Meridia couldn't quite trust. Mornings with Livia, afternoons exploring the grounds, where a single empty stall in the stable still bore a brass nameplate that read, Artemis, Livia's mother's horse, the one Lord Alistair had sold. Evenings were formal, Lord Alistair presiding with effortless charm. Lady Portia attended every meal. She was not what Meridia had expected. A young woman of 23, with pale blonde hair and watchful hazel eyes, who spoke when spoken to, and moved through the house with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. Caius, for his part, was a ghost. He appeared at meals, spoke when required, and vanished into his study or the library with a finality that discouraged follow-up. "He's always like this," Livia said, catching Meridia watching the library door close. "Since Father died, walls on top of walls." "Your uncle said something similar." Livia's fork clattered. "Father didn't destroy himself by loving. He destroyed himself by stopping. Uncle Alistair tells it like love was the problem. Giving up was the problem." She paused. "Caius is doing the same thing differently. Father froze by withdrawing. Caius freezes by controlling. He thinks if he never lets himself want anything, he'll never lose anything. And your uncle exploits that. You're the variable Uncle Alistair can't account for, the thing Caius can't control." That evening, unable to sleep, she found herself in the library. 2 stories of shelves rose to a vaulted ceiling painted with a faded celestial map, constellations picked out in gold leaf that glowed like actual stars. A mezzanine gallery ran along 3 walls, accessible by a spiral staircase. She climbed to the gallery, pulled down a volume of Keats, and curled into an alcove chair. She'd been reading for perhaps 20 minutes when a voice drifted up from below. "You're in my father's chair," she startled. Caius stood at the base of the staircase, coat removed, cravat loosened. "Don't be sorry. He would have been pleased. He spent most evenings up here," said the gallery was closer to the stars. He climbed the stairs and looked at the book in her hands. "Keats, Ode to a Nightingale. I've read it 100 times, and it still undoes me." "Which part?" Meridia considered. "The part where he says he's been half in love with easeful death, not because he wants to die, but because he's so saturated with beauty that existence itself becomes unbearable. The idea that feeling too much is its own kind of destruction." Caius was quiet, then moved to the alcove opposite hers. My father underlined that passage. The margins were full of his notes about grief, about whether beauty was worth the pain. What did he conclude? He didn't. The note stopped halfway through. Caius's voice thinned. I think he ran out of courage to answer his own question. Or maybe the answer was in the living, not the writing. He looked at her then, really looked. Not the formal assessment from the auction or the controlled distance of dinner. Something raw. A man peering through a crack in his own wall. "My uncle told you about my mother," he said. It wasn't a question. "He told me a version. Livia told me another." "What version do you believe?" "I believe your mother was extraordinary, and your father loved her completely. And losing her broke something that never fully healed. I believe your uncle saw an opportunity in that grief and has been exploiting it ever since. And I believe you're terrified that you inherited your father's capacity for love along with his title, and you'd rather feel nothing than risk feeling everything." The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the fire breathing 2 stories below. Caius stared at her with an expression she couldn't name. Shock, perhaps, or recognition, or the particular discomfort of someone who'd been seen through and wasn't sure whether to be grateful or furious. "You don't pull your punches," he said finally. "You didn't hire me to be gentle. I didn't hire you at all. I made you an offer. You chose to accept. Is there a difference?" "An enormous one." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "Hired implies obligation. Choice implies agency. I need you to have agency, Miss Voss. I need you to be here because you chose to be, not because you felt trapped. Otherwise, my uncle will see through us in a week. I chose to be here." "Why?" The question was direct, almost urgent, and Meridia understood suddenly that he wasn't asking about strategy or arrangements. He was asking something far more dangerous. Because my whole life, people have looked at my circumstances and seen limitations. You looked at my circumstances and saw strength. She held his gaze. No one's ever done that before. A tectonic movement crossed his face, controlled and vast. He opened his mouth, closed it, then stood abruptly. "It's late," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You should rest. My uncle returns to full residence tomorrow, and he'll be watching." "He's always watching." "Yes, but tomorrow he'll start testing." Caius moved toward the stairs, then paused. "The Keats. Keep it. That copy was my mother's, before it was my father's. The book should be read, not preserved." He descended the stairs without looking back, and Meridia sat holding a dead woman's poetry and a living man's unfinished sentences, understanding that this arrangement was already something more than either of them had planned for. The following days confirmed what Livia had warned. Lord Alistair didn't attack. He observed, always pleasant, always interested, always filing information like a naturalist cataloging specimens. He praised her intelligence, complimented her composure, and told stories designed to remind her how vast the gulf was between her world and theirs. And through it all, Lady Portia watched. On the 6th day, Meridia found Portia alone in the music room, hands resting on keys she wasn't playing, staring at the garden with the careful blankness of someone who'd been performing contentment for so long, she'd forgotten what the real thing felt like. "Do you play?" Meridia asked from the doorway. Portia startled, her composure cracking for just a moment before reassembling. "A little. Lord Alistair prefers Handel." "And what do you prefer?" The question seemed to genuinely surprise her. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing, as if no one had asked her that in so long she'd misplaced the answer. "Schubert," she said finally. "But it doesn't suit the room." "Play it anyway." Portia stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to the keys. She began to play, and the music that filled the room was nothing like the dutiful Handel performances Meridia had heard at dinner. This was raw and aching, a melody that climbed and fell like breathing, full of longing that the player would never have expressed in words. When the final note faded, Portia's hands trembled on the keys. "You play beautifully," Meridia said. "Lord Alistair says Schubert is too emotional for polite company." "Then polite company doesn't deserve Schubert." Something flickered in Portia's eyes. Gratitude, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. Neither of them mentioned it again, but that evening at dinner, when Lord Alistair steered the conversation toward Lady Portia's many accomplishments, Meridia caught Portia's gaze across the table. The look lasted only a second, but in that second, the ground between them changed. The rival became a person. The pawn began to see the board. And Meridia understood that winning this siege wouldn't mean defeating Lady Portia. It would mean freeing her. The Ashford Spring Gala was Lord Alistair's creation, though he presented it as a family tradition. 300 guests, a full orchestra. The cream of society invited to Heronwick Hall for an evening designed, Meridia understood now, to showcase Lady Portia as the natural mistress of this house and expose Meridia as the interloper she was. "The guest list is stacked with his allies," Livia said, pacing while Nettie pinned adjustments on a gown of midnight blue silk. "Every society matron who owes Uncle Alistair a favor will be watching you." "Then I'll give them something worth watching." Nettie arranged her hair in a clean sweep that bared her neck. The only ornament was a thin silver chain with a single sapphire that Livia produced from a velvet box. "It was Mother's," Livia said, fastening it around Meridia's throat. "Caius doesn't know I kept it. Uncle Alistair sold most of her jewelry, but I hid this one in a hollowed-out book in the library. Seemed like the safest place since he never reads. "Livia, I can't wear your mother's necklace." "You can, and you will. Mother would have wanted it worn by someone who'd fight for this family. That's you, whether you've realized it yet or not." The ballroom blazed with chandeliers, the orchestra playing from a raised gallery. Meridia descended the staircase beside Livia, acutely aware of 300 faces turning upward. The whispers began immediately, a sound like wind through dry leaves, rising and falling as people identified her, assessed her, judged her. Caius waited at the base. When he looked up and saw her, his mask slipped. Just for a moment. Just enough. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice perfectly composed. "You look adequate." Livia kicked him in the ankle. "What my brother means is that you look extraordinary, and he's forgotten how human speech works." I know what I said, but the tips of his ears had gone pink. Lord Alistair appeared with Lady Portia on his arm. Portia wore rose pink, blonde hair dressed with pearls. Her eyes found the sapphire at Meridia's throat. She knew that necklace. "How splendid," Lord Alistair said. "Madame Laurent always knows how to make the most of limited material." The insult was wrapped so expertly in compliment that most people wouldn't have caught it. "She told me she considered it her finest work this season," Meridia said pleasantly. "Apparently she finds simplicity more challenging than ornament." Lord Alistair's smile didn't waver. "How philosophical. Shall we?" Lord Alistair introduced her to guest after guest, each introduction calibrated to expose a weakness. Emphasis on country, emphasis on addition, temporary, removable. Meridia returned to serve with quiet precision. When someone asked whether she found Heronwick Hall overwhelming, she said, "The house is magnificent, but houses don't intimidate me. Only small minds do." The woman laughed uncertainly, unsure whether she'd been insulted. Through it all, Caius watched. He didn't hover. He didn't rescue. He simply watched, from across the room, from the edge of conversations, with an attention that felt like gravity. The waltz came at 10 o'clock. Caius appeared at her side with the formal precision of a military maneuver. "Dance with me." Is that a request or a command? It's a strategic necessity. My uncle has just asked the orchestra to play Lady Portia's favorite waltz. He expects me to dance it with her. Then perhaps you should. I'd rather dance with you. The words were simple. The way he said them was not. There was a tremor beneath the control, a vibration in the bedrock of his composure, and Meridia felt it resonate in her own chest. She took his hand. The waltz began, and Meridia discovered that Caius Ashford danced the way he did everything else, with absolute precision and total control. His hand at her waist was correct, his frame impeccable, his lead clear and unwavering. He danced like a man executing a flawless plan. "You're counting," she said. "I'm leading. You're counting steps. I can feel the numbers in your shoulders." His grip stiffened. "I don't know how else to do it. Stop thinking. The music already knows where to go. Trust it." "I don't trust things I can't control." "I know. Try anyway." Something shifted. His grip softened. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. The mechanical precision gave way to something more fluid, more instinctive. They turned together, and for the first time, the dance felt like a conversation rather than a demonstration. "Better," she murmured. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm impressed. There's a difference." His eyes met hers, and the ballroom fell away. 300 people vanished. The orchestra became distant, a soundtrack to a private moment occurring in plain sight. His thumb moved against the silk at her waist, the smallest motion, involuntary, intimate. "Everyone is watching," he said. "I know. My uncle is furious. I know that too. You're wearing my mother's necklace. Livia gave it to me. I recognized it the moment I saw you on the stairs." His voice dropped to barely a breath. "She would have liked you. My mother. She would have liked you enormously." Meridia's throat closed. She blinked hard, refusing tears in front of 300 witnesses. The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the floor, hands still joined, the echo of the music hanging between them like a held breath. Then Caius stepped back, bowed formally, and the public performance resumed. But the private performance, the one only they could see, had already said everything that mattered. Later, she stepped through glass doors onto the terrace. Stars burned overhead, the same constellations painted on the library ceiling. "You survived." Caius's voice came from the shadows, coat unbuttoned, cravat loosened. "Your uncle is very good at what he does," she said, "but he made a mistake tonight." Caius straightened. "What mistake?" "Lady Portia. He positioned her as the perfect choice, but he made her perform. Every smile choreographed. People could feel the difference between performance and presence." "And you?" "I was just being myself. Your uncle's strategy requires Lady Portia to be flawless. Mine only requires me to be real." The moonlight caught the intensity in his gray eyes. "You make this very difficult," he said. "Make what difficult?" "Not wanting you." The words landed like a spark on dry wood. Meridia felt them ignite in her chest, spreading heat through her ribs, her throat, her fingertips. "Caius, don't." He held up a hand, but it was trembling. "If you say my name like that again, I'll do something I can't take back." Maybe taking things back is overrated. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands found her face, gentle despite their urgency. "This isn't part of the arrangement," he whispered. "I know." "I don't care." He kissed her, not careful or strategic. Raw, urgent, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that said he'd been thinking about this moment for longer than he'd ever admit. She kissed him back with equal need, her fingers gripping his lapels, as if the world had tilted and he was the only fixed point. When they broke apart, breathing hard, he laughed. A real laugh, quiet and surprised. "Well," he said, "that wasn't strategic at all." "No, it wasn't. My uncle will know. By tomorrow, someone will have seen, and he'll know." "Then let him know." Meridia pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. "I'm tired of performing, aren't you?" Before he could answer, a voice drifted from the doorway. Bright, calculated, lethal. How touching. They stepped apart. Lady Portia stood in the glass doorway, her rose silk catching the ballroom light behind her. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands were clenched at her sides. "Lord Alastair is asking for you, Your Grace," she said, her voice perfectly composed. "Something about the Whitfield accounts. He said it was urgent." It was a summons, not a request. Caius glanced at Meridia, his eyes full of everything he hadn't finished saying, then straightened his coat and walked past Portia into the house. "He'll hurt you," Portia said quietly. "Not Caius. Lord Alastair. He'll use what he saw tonight." "Will you tell him?" A long pause, then softly, "He doesn't need me to tell him. He already knows." She disappeared into the light, leaving Meridia alone with stars and the taste of a kiss that had changed everything. Lord Alastair struck 3 days later, not with confrontation but with kindness, which was infinitely worse. He arranged an afternoon tea in the East drawing room and invited 4 women from the neighboring estates, all of them his allies, all of them fluent in the particular dialect of cruelty that disguised itself as concern. Meridia recognized the ambush the moment she walked in. The women were seated in a semicircle, teacups in hand, smiles in place. Lord Alastair presided from an armchair by the window, the benevolent host, the concerned uncle, the man who simply wanted the best for everyone. Miss Voss, how wonderful. You must meet Mrs. Alderton, Lady Crane, Miss Hartwell, and Mrs. Prescott. They've been dying to make your acquaintance." Dying was the operative word. The attack began gently. Self-education is so important for those who lack formal opportunities. Your mother takes in mending? How resourceful. Each comment delivered with a smile, each smile carrying a blade. Then Mrs. Alderton leaned forward. "My dear, I must say, I do admire your bravery. Coming here, to Heronwick Hall, stepping into a world so far beyond your experience. It takes a certain kind of courage. Or perhaps," she paused delicately, "a certain kind of ambition." The word ambition hung in the air like poison. "I'm not sure I understand your meaning, Mrs. Alderton." "Only that the Duke of Heronwick is a considerable prize, and you are, forgive me, a considerable reach. People will talk, Miss Voss. They're already talking, and what they're saying isn't kind." "What are they saying?" Mrs. Alderton glanced at Lord Allister, who gave the smallest nod. Permission granted. "They're saying you're a fortune hunter, that you've positioned yourself in this house deliberately, using Livia's friendship as a screen, that your family's debts were the true motivation, and that you've set your cap at a grieving duke who isn't thinking clearly enough to see through you." Each sentence was a hammer blow. Meridia felt them in her chest, not because they were true, but because they were precisely the fears she'd been carrying since the moment she walked through Heronwick Hall's front door. "They're also saying," Lady Crane added with theatrical reluctance, "that you were seen on the terrace during the gala, with the Duke, in a compromising position." The room tilted. Meridia's hands gripped her teacup so tightly, she heard the porcelain creak. Whatever was seen was misinterpreted. Perhaps, but perception is everything in society, Miss Voss. And the perception is that you are a girl from nowhere who is trying to become someone she'll never be. Mrs. Alderton sat back with the satisfaction of a surgeon completing an operation. It would be kinder, truly kinder, to leave before the damage becomes irreparable. Your reputation, such as it is, can still be salvaged, but not for much longer. Lord Allister spoke then, his voice heavy with fabricated regret. "I've tried to shield you from this, Miss Voss, but Mrs. Alderton is right. Society can be unforgiving, and I wouldn't want to see you hurt." Meridia looked at him. This man who'd orchestrated every word spoken in this room, who'd invited these women specifically because they'd delivered the message he wanted without his fingerprints on it, and she understood. This was his artistry, not the crude cruelty of a villain, but the surgical precision of a man who destroyed people while maintaining the appearance of trying to save them. "Thank you for your concern," she said, and her voice was steady even though her hands were not. "All of you. I'll certainly give your words careful thought." She stood, set down her teacup with a clink that sounded too loud in the silent room, and walked out with her spine straight and her chin level. She made it to the blue suite before she broke. Nettie found her 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, the midnight blue gown pooled around her like spilled ink, crying without sound. The maid said nothing. She simply sat down beside her, took her hand, and waited. "They're right," Meridia whispered finally. "Not about the fortune hunting, but about the rest. I don't belong here. I've been pretending I could stand in these rooms and hold my own against people who've been navigating this world since birth, and it's a fantasy, a borrowed fantasy in a borrowed dress in a borrowed room." "Miss," Nettie said quietly, "I've worked in grand houses since I was 14. Belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about whether you're brave enough to stay. Bravery doesn't change bloodlines. It doesn't make a merchant's daughter into a duchess. No, but it makes her worth more than one. Meridia looked at this freckled girl with her escaped auburn curls and her quiet, fierce loyalty, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not a break, an opening. But the opening closed again that evening when she overheard Lord Alistair in the corridor outside the library, speaking to Caius in the measured tones of a man delivering hard truths. "I'm not trying to control you, nephew. I'm trying to protect you from repeating your father's mistake. He chose a woman who couldn't survive this world, and it destroyed them both. Miss Voss is clever and brave and entirely unsuitable. And if you continue down this path, you will lose everything. Not because I take it from you, but because the weight of your position will crush her, and watching it happen will crush you." She couldn't hear Caius's response. She didn't need to. Lord Alistair's words were already doing their work, not because they were manipulative, but because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. What if he was right? What if love wasn't enough to bridge the gap? What if choosing Caius meant watching herself diminish year by year, ground down by a world that would never fully accept her, and watching him grieve another loss? She returned to the blue suite, sat at the writing desk, and began to pack. She left at dawn. No letters this time. Letters could be argued with, intercepted, used as leverage. She simply packed her original trunk with her original belongings, the dark blue wool dress, the lace collar, and her mother's lavender sachets. She left the midnight blue gown in the wardrobe. She left the accessories, the slippers, the shawls Livia had accumulated for her. She kept two things: the Keats that had been Caius's mother's, and the sapphire necklace, not to keep, but because leaving it in the empty room felt like leaving a piece of Livia's heart on a shelf, and she couldn't bear that. She'd send it back. Later. When distance had made her brave enough to write. Nettie appeared in the doorway at 5:30, her eyes red. "You're leaving." "I have to." "Does he know?" "He will." Nettie crossed the room and pressed something into Meridia's hand, a small sprig of dried lavender from the garden. "So you remember the way back. When you're ready." Meridia embraced her quickly, fiercely, then pulled away before the tears could start again. The house was silent as she descended the stairs. The servants hadn't yet begun their morning rounds. The portraits watched her leave with the same indifference they'd shown when she arrived. She was nothing to this house, a temporary guest, a passing season, a footnote in the long history of people who'd walked through these halls and been forgotten. The front door was heavy. She pulled it open herself, stepping into the gray pre-dawn light, and nearly collided with Lady Portia. Portia stood on the front steps in a riding habit, her blonde hair braided, her face bare of its usual careful composure. She looked younger without the performance, smaller, more real. "You're leaving," Portia said. Not a question. "Yes. Because of what they said at the tea. Because of what's true." Portia studied her for a long moment, then did something Meridia didn't expect. She stepped aside to clear the path, but as Meridia passed, she caught her arm. "He'll come after you," Portia said quietly. "Not because he's strategic or stubborn, though he's both, because you're the first person who's made him forget to be careful. I've watched him my whole life, Meridia. I've never seen him frightened before. He's frightened now. That means something. It means we'll both get hurt. Maybe. Or maybe getting hurt is how you know something's real." Meridia searched Portia's face for calculation, for the rival's satisfaction at watching a competitor flee. She found none. Only the quiet understanding of someone who recognized what it meant to be trapped by other people's plans. "Take care of Livia," Meridia said. "Take care of yourself." Portia released her arm. "And for what it's worth, Lord Alistair has been wrong about everything important for as long as I've known him. He was wrong about Caius's father. He was wrong about Catherine. And he's wrong about you." Meridia walked down the gravel drive as the sky lightened from gray to silver. She didn't look back. Looking back was for people who believed they might return. The coach she'd hired from the village carried her south through a countryside that blurred behind her tears. By noon, she was home. The modest rooms closed around her like a fist, the worn furniture, the smell of bread and soap, the mending basket overflowing in the corner. Everything exactly as she'd left it, which was the cruelest part, because she was not. Her mother took one look at her face and asked no questions. She simply made tea, set out bread and butter, and sat across the kitchen table with the patience of a woman who'd survived worse silences. "It ended," Meridia said. "Did it need to?" "Yes." "Did you want it to?" The question cracked something that Meridia had been holding together since she'd pulled the front door of Heronwick Hall closed behind her. She pressed her hands flat on the table, feeling the grain of the wood, the chips and scratches of years of use. "I wanted to stay," she whispered. "More than I've wanted anything. And that's why I had to leave." Her mother covered her hands with her own. "Your father said the same thing when his business failed, that wanting something too much was dangerous, that walking away was the brave choice. He spent 3 years sitting in that chair by the window, and I've never once seen him look brave. I've seen him look safe, and I've seen him look empty, but never brave." Meridia pulled her hands free and went upstairs to the small room she shared with the mending. She sat on her bed and held the Keats to her chest and tried to remember why leaving had been the right decision. The pages fell open to Ode to a Nightingale. In the margin, in a handwriting she now recognized as Catherine Ashford's, someone had written a single line: "Stay, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." 8 days passed. 8 days of mending stockings and marketing and reading and pretending the world hadn't expanded and contracted and left her stranded in the wreckage of her own caution. Jonathan came home on the 4th day, looking uncharacteristically subdued. He sat at the kitchen table and said nothing for a long time, which was so unlike him that Meridia stopped what she was doing and stared. "Declan came to see me," he said finally. "I don't want to hear about Declan's schemes." "This isn't a scheme. The Duke came to London. He found Declan, and from what I understand, the conversation involved being held against a wall by his lapels. Declan said he's never seen anyone that controlled be that furious." Meridia's heart lurched. "What did he want?" "Your address," which Declan refused to give because apparently even Declan has limits when a man looks like he might commit actual violence. So the Duke did something else instead. Jonathan pulled a folded document from his coat. He went to the courts. He filed a formal challenge to his uncle's authority over the Ashford Trust. The petition alleges financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of estate assets. It names Lord Alistair directly. Meridia took the document with numb fingers. Legal language, dense and precise, but the core of it was clear. Caius was attacking his uncle openly, publicly, without the shield of a fake courtship or a strategic arrangement. He was risking everything. "There's more," Jonathan said. He dismissed Lady Portia's engagement arrangement, not privately, publicly. He wrote to Lady Portia's mother and Lord Alistair jointly, stating that he had no intention of marrying Lady Portia and that any understanding to the contrary had been imposed without his consent. The letter has been circulated. Everyone knows. He's exposed himself completely. He's burned every bridge Uncle Alistair built. Jonathan leaned forward. And then he did something I really don't understand. He settled our family's remaining debts, not just the ones he already held, all of them. The butcher, the draper, the physician. Every outstanding account Father left behind, paid in full. Meridia stared at the document, the legal petition, the evidence of a man dismantling his own careful fortress stone by stone. Why would he do that? Because, a voice said from the doorway, and Meridia spun to find Livia standing in their kitchen, windswept and still wearing traveling clothes. He wants you to know that if you come back, it's not because you need to, it's because you choose to. Livia crossed the small room and grabbed Meridia's hands. Her eyes were fierce and bright and rimmed with exhaustion. He fired Mrs. Gould. Did Jonathan mention that? Replaced every servant who reported to Uncle Alistair. Portia helped, actually. She gave him a list of every staff member who carried information to Uncle Alistair. She's been keeping that list for years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Portia helped him? Portia walked into Caius's study the morning after you left and told him everything, every scheme, every manipulation, every conversation Uncle Alistair had conducted through her. She said, Livia's voice broke. She said watching you leave was the first time she understood that she could leave too. That being a pawn was a choice, not a sentence. Meridia sank into a kitchen chair. The room felt too small for the enormity of what she was hearing. He's not asking you to come back for the arrangement, Livia said, kneeling beside her. The arrangement is over. Uncle Alistair's power is collapsing. The courts will handle the rest. He's asking you to come back because the house is wrong without you. Because I'm wrong without you. Because he sits in the library gallery at midnight, reading Keats, and pretending he's not waiting to hear your footsteps on the stairs. Livia, don't you dare say no because you're frightened. Fear is Uncle Alistair's weapon. Don't hand it to him after we've already won. Meridia looked at her mother, who stood in the doorway drying her hands on the same cloth she always used, the same steady eyes, the same unbreakable calm. Well, Constance said, you want me to go back. I want you to stop doing what your father did. I want you to stop choosing safety over joy and calling it wisdom. Her mother's voice was gentle, but underneath it was iron. Go back, Meridia. Not because a duke is asking. Because the woman you became in that house is the woman you were always supposed to be. Meridia stood. Her legs were unsteady. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. I need the carriage, she said. Livia laughed, tears streaming down her face. It's already outside. I wasn't leaving without you. The drive back to Heronwick Hall took 4 hours. Meridia spent every minute of it preparing what she'd say, and discarding every preparation. Words felt inadequate. Plans felt false. By the time the carriage passed through the stone gatehouse, she had nothing prepared at all. The house looked different. Not physically. The pale stone walls still rose 3 stories. The columns still framed the entrance. The windows still watched like eyes. But something in its atmosphere had shifted, as if a pressure that had been building for months had finally broken. Caius was not at the door. Portia was. She stood on the front steps in a simple dress, unadorned, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked, for the first time since Meridia had known her, like herself. He's in the library, Portia said. He's been there since you left. I think he's read every book in the gallery twice. She paused. Lord Alistair departed yesterday. The court summoned him to answer the petition. He went quietly, which surprised everyone. I think he knew it was over. Portia, Meridia stopped on the steps. Thank you. For what you did. I didn't do it for you. Portia's chin lifted. I did it for me. You showed me that pawns can leave the board. The rest was my choice. She stepped aside. Go. He's waited long enough. So have you. The library was quiet. Late afternoon light fell through the tall windows, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny planets in their own small universe. The celestial ceiling glowed faintly, gold constellations winking in the shadow above. Caius was in the gallery, his father's chair. He sat with a book open in his lap that he wasn't reading, his head tipped back against the leather, his eyes closed. He looked exhausted. He looked broken open, like a man who'd finally stopped holding himself together and discovered that falling apart didn't kill him. She climbed the spiral staircase, each step a small thunder on the wrought iron. His eyes opened when she reached the top. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply looked at her with an expression so undefended, so completely without armor, that it hurt to see. "You came back," he said. "I came back. You didn't have to. I know. That's why it matters." He stood slowly, setting the book aside. They faced each other across the narrow gallery, two people who'd spent weeks building walls, and one night tearing them down. "I filed the petition," he said. "I know. I dismissed the arrangement with Lady Portia. I know that, too. I settled your family's debts, all of them. Jonathan told me. I need you to understand why." He stepped closer. "Not because I'm trying to buy you or obligate you. Because I needed you to be free, completely free, free of debt, free of arrangement, free of every reason to be here except the one that matters. And what reason is that? Because you want to be." His voice cracked on the last word, the first break in his composure she'd ever heard. "Because I'm asking you, not as a duke or a strategist or a man with a plan, but as someone who sat in this chair for 8 nights, reading your book and understanding finally what my father's unfinished notes were trying to say." What were they trying to say? That the answer isn't in the writing, it's in the living. That beauty is worth the pain. That feeling everything is better than feeling nothing. He reached out and took her hands. His grip was trembling. "You told me once that I was afraid I'd inherited my father's capacity for love. You were right. I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life in this library, reading about emotions I'm too cowardly to feel." Meridia squeezed his hands. "I left because I was afraid, too. Afraid that wanting something this much would destroy me, the way it destroyed your father. It didn't destroy him. Stopping destroyed him. Giving up destroyed him. Love was the only thing keeping him alive. Your uncle said. My uncle was wrong. About my father. About my mother. About what this family needs." Caius pulled her closer. "I don't need a suitable match. I don't need a strategic alliance. I need someone who tells me the truth, who refuses to let me hide in ledgers and strategies, who stands in my library at midnight and dismantles me with Keats and honesty." His forehead pressed against hers. "I need you. Not the arrangement. You." "I love you," Meridia said. The words came out raw, unpolished, nothing like the careful speeches she'd imagined. "I've been trying to talk myself out of it since the night you gave me your mother's poetry. It hasn't worked." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the terrace. The terrace had been hunger and surprise. This was quiet and deep if I'm uncertain. The kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything because it already knew. When they finally pulled apart, Caius kept his arms around her. "There's someone we need to talk to," he said. "Portia?" "She's already on our side. I mean someone harder." "Who?" "Myself," he exhaled. "I need to stop building walls. I need to stop treating every emotion like a threat to be managed. I need to actually grieve my father, properly, not strategically." He paused. "That's going to be messy. I'm not afraid of messy. I know. That's why I love you." They descended the staircase hand in hand, and at the bottom, they found Livia and Portia sitting together on the library settee, pretending very badly not to have been listening. "Finally," Livia said, wiping her eyes. "Only took you two a combined emotional crisis and a legal petition." "And an extremely ill-advised dawn departure," Portia added mildly. Meridia laughed, and the sound filled the library like music, bouncing off the celestial ceiling and the leather-bound spines and the ghosts of everyone who'd ever loved in this room. The Heronwick Midsummer Ball wasn't Lord Alistair's creation. It was Livia's. Livia planned it in 3 weeks. Invitations went to everyone, not Lord Alistair's curated allies, but merchants and gentry and titled families alike. Portia helped, selecting music she actually loved, moving through preparations with a lightness Meridia had never seen. During a fitting, Portia said quietly, "I'm relieved. And a bit lost. I don't know who I am without the performance. You're the woman who plays Schubert when no one's listening. Start there." The night of the ball, Meridia wore a gown of deep emerald silk with Catherine's sapphire at her throat. Nettie made final adjustments, her freckled face bright. "You look like you belong, miss." "I feel like I belong." And she recognized, with a jolt, the woman in the mirror. Not the careful survivor from weeks ago. Someone who'd been tested and broken and rebuilt into someone she'd always been, but never had room to become. Caius met her at the base of the staircase. He was in formal black, as always, but something was different. The rigid posture had softened. The controlled mask had cracks in it, intentional ones, gaps where warmth and humor leaked through. "You look," he began. "If you say adequate, I will push you down these stairs." He laughed, a full, open laugh that turned heads and drew stares, and made Livia clap her hands with delight from across the entrance hall. "You look like everything I was afraid to want," he said. "Is that better?" Significantly, he offered his arm. She took it. Together, they entered the ballroom. The whispers started, as they always did. But this time, the whispers carried a different note. Curiosity rather than condemnation, interest rather than judgment. Lord Alistair's absence was noted, his downfall already the subject of drawing-room speculation across 3 counties. The narrative was shifting. No longer a story about a duke's inappropriate infatuation, but about a man who'd fought to reclaim his family's legacy from a corrupt guardian. And the woman beside him, the merchant's daughter, who'd survived every test the old order could throw at her, she was becoming part of the legend. Caius led her to the center of the ballroom floor. The orchestra waited. 300 faces watched. "Before we dance," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence, "there's something I need to say. To you, in front of everyone." Meridia's heart began to hammer. "Caius, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done before you left. Something I should have done the night of the spring gala. Something I've been too careful and too frightened and too desperately strategic to do until now." He took both her hands, and then, to a collective gasp from 300 guests, he dropped to one knee. "Meridia Voss, you walked into my life because a scoundrel named Declan Farshaw abandoned you at an auction house, and you refused to leave even when I tried to make you. You stood in my library and told me the truth when everyone else told me what I wanted to hear. You protected a woman who was supposed to be your rival. You made my sister laugh again. You made me feel again, which is the bravest and most terrifying thing anyone has ever done." His grip on her hands tightened. "I tried to make you a strategy. You became my compass. I tried to make you a shield. You became my home. I tried to make you say no, and you said yes to everything that mattered." The ballroom was so silent she could hear candle flames flickering in the chandeliers above. "I'm not offering you a title or a fortune or a position. I'm offering you a man who is terrified and imperfect and only just learning how to feel things without trying to control them first. A man who reads Keats at midnight and dances by counting steps and loves you so completely that the thought of losing you makes every other fear feel trivial. Will you marry me?" Meridia looked down at this man, this duke, this fortress who'd let her breach his walls, and felt every fear she'd carried since childhood. Fear of poverty, of wanting, of hoping for things she couldn't have. Rise up and then, quietly, settle. Yes, she said. But I have a condition. His eyebrow rose. Of course you do. Stop counting steps. When we dance, when we live, when we love, stop counting and just be here. He stood, pulling her close. I'll try. I can't promise I won't relapse. That's what I'm here for. He kissed her in the center of the Heronwick ballroom, in front of every person who'd ever doubted her right to stand there. The response was split. Applause from some, shocked silence from others, a few delighted shrieks from Livia's corner of the room, and one quiet, satisfied nod from Portia, who sat at the pianoforte and began to play Schubert as the kiss ended and the waltz began. They danced, and for the first time, Caius didn't count. 4 months later, on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays had always been the day Meridia Voss's life chose to change, she found a letter tucked into the pages of the Keats. It was in Catherine Ashford's handwriting, the same careful script from the margins. But this wasn't a marginal note. It was a full letter, folded small and hidden in the binding, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. My darling, if you are reading this, then the book has found its way to someone who loves it as much as I do. I want you to know that I chose this life with open eyes and a full heart. They will tell you it was foolish. They will tell you love is insufficient armor against the world. They will be right about the armor and wrong about everything else. Love is not armor. It is the wound and the healing both. It is the reason to stand in the rain and the shelter that makes the standing bearable. Choose it anyway. Choose it knowing the cost. Choose it knowing the pain. Because the alternative, the safe life, the careful life, the life without risk, that is not living at all. That is simply waiting. And waiting is the cruelest thing you can do to a heart that was made for more. Meridia sat in the library gallery, in Catherine's chair, holding Catherine's letter, wearing Catherine's sapphire, and cried. Not with grief, with gratitude, for the woman who'd loved first and left behind a roadmap for the women who'd love after. Caius found her there, as he always did. He read the letter in silence, his hand steady, his eyes bright. She knew, he said. She knew someone would need to hear it. He sat beside her and took her hand, and together they looked up at the celestial ceiling, the gold constellations glowing in the evening light. Do you know what I love most about this room? Meridia asked. The books. The stars. Someone painted a sky on a ceiling so that even on the darkest nights, even when the real sky was hidden, there'd be something beautiful to look up at. She leaned against his shoulder. That's what you gave me. A sky when I couldn't find one. You gave me something better, he said, pressing his lips to her hair. You gave me a reason to look up. Outside, the grounds of Heronwick Hall stretched toward a horizon going gold with sunset. Inside, in their library with its painted stars and shelves full of stories, the Duke of Heronwick and his entirely unsuitable Duchess sat together in the quiet, not performing, not strategizing, not counting steps, just present, just together, just home. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories breathe and grow, because you believe in love that fights, in characters who refuse to surrender, in endings that feel earned because they were. Your presence in this space gives these words meaning. Your engagement, your comments, your willingness to feel alongside these characters. That's what makes this community extraordinary. If a line stayed with you, if a moment made your heart race, I'd love to know. Your voice shapes the stories that come next, And if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and characters who choose courage over safety, consider subscribing. Thank you for being here. You make this what it is.